Now, what you just saw was footage of an oil facility burning and footage of helicopters. We can't say for sure that we know exactly what is happening in those videos, but we do know what they're alleged to be about. And you might think, well, that's all very typical. Russia invaded Ukraine. There's been any number of different strikes. But the thing that is very notable about this is that was not footage, if you believe it, from inside of Ukraine. That was outside of the Ukrainian borders. In fact, a Russian politician wrote on Telegram that 2 Ukrainian helicopters launched an airstrike on a depot in the Russian city of Belgorod, located 24 miles north of the Ukrainian border. So if this is what they are saying it is, inside of Russia and giving sort of cagey answers on the Ukrainian side, but we're gonna go through all of it, this would be the first time that the Ukrainian military has struck back against Russia outside of their own borders. So one of these videos was posted by a semi-official Ukrainian military account with the caption, "Ukrainian aviation at work in Belgrade." So I don't consider that confirmation, especially because a representative for Ukraine's army earlier told a newspaper that the attack could be a false flag operation to justify further violence against Ukrainians, which is not difficult to imagine, Brett. But I don't know, like we can't trust the Russian politicians saying that it happened. Ukraine has, I could understand reasons why they would want to claim it and reasons why they wouldn't want to claim it. It's not impossible that it could be a false flag. It's one facility, a little bit of footage of helicopters. What do you think?
Reporting live from the fog of war is everyone not caring what actually happened is my take on what's happened. No, obviously you care. And this is definitely one of those, it's more of a diagnostic situation for all intents and purposes than anything I can report on with confidence personally, and I'll only speak for myself. So let's break it down. There's a lot of people who are gonna say this is not a false flag operation, who will then claim wild other things are false flag operations with just the same amount of evidence. Aside from that, it is hilarious if Russia gets mad at a country for invading it. Like if this is a strike from the Ukrainians on the Russians, and the Russians are mad because there has been a military strike on their soil, to complain too much about that would be just a huge demonstration of a lack of self-awareness. I think that is hilarious because in the meantime, they're invading another country, and pretending it's otherwise is disingenuous and cynical.
Yeah, 100%. I expect that will be their approach. Non-consistent though it might be, it's very much the international equivalent of the like. What does Jank always say about the time he was wrestling the guy? And then the guy tapped
Mr. Jamaica.
Him, and then no, not that. And then he was like, "Why are you hitting me? Why are you hitting me?" Well, you were on top of me. I get to hit back at some point. And I wish that we could say for sure. I mean, we have to be aware of so many potential biases. Not only the biases that the Russian sources for information or the Ukrainian sources for information, official or unofficial, might have, but also our own biases. Because we might be biased to think that, okay, we've heard about potential false flags, so this fits into that narrative. And we might be biased to think that. Or we might think, well, we know that Ukraine has been pushing back Russian forces. We're in fact gonna get into that in just a minute. So this kind of fits into that narrative. So maybe I buy it for that reason. Or just emotionally, you might like the idea that Ukraine is finally striking back. But none of those predispositions, I guess I would call them, have anything to do about the facts about whether this actually happened. And we unfortunately are having to rely on unreliable information to the extent that information is available at all. It is possible by the time you're watching this clip on YouTube or listening to the podcast that this has been confirmed one way or the other, but we're just giving you our initial reactions to something that is, if it is what they say it is, or honestly, even if it's not, it is an escalation. It's an escalation if it's true. It's also an escalation if it's a false flag. We have no idea. So we will have to wait and see. What we do know though, is that Ukraine has been continuing to push back Russian forces. Russian forces are saying that they're pulling out of certain areas. That has been semi-true based on the evidence that's been presented to us. Some of the cities they said they would be lowering the scale of their attacks on are still being struck on a regular basis. But we do know that in recent days, Ukraine has recaptured a number of towns and cities, as well as the Chernobyl nuclear plant, actually, which they had to flee from what feels like a week and a half, 2 weeks ago, they have now actually reclaimed. And a US official says that there's an airfield not far from Kyiv that they've also retaken. And some of this, there's at least a little bit more evidence for. For instance, one of the main social media accounts for the Ministry of Defense for Ukraine said in response to Chernobyl, Russian occupiers left Chernobyl nuclear power plant. 2 key reasons: losses caused by Ukrainian army and radiation exposure. Russian mutants lost this round of Stalker. That is, if you're not familiar with it, a video game that is sort of a sci-fi situation that developed in the area around Chernobyl. And so it's a weird thing for the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense to reference, and referring to them as mutants is, I get it, it's a good own. That area, if it is experiencing radiation exposure, it's gonna be a problem for people other than just the Russian military. And we'll get into some of that, but Brett, what do you think?
This is what happens when you step into like across the cultural divide from my personal perspective. It's like, whoa, the Ukrainians and the Russians hate each other. This is how they talk to each other. It gets real weird. There's probably a lot of inside, like non-jokes, but inside disses. And I don't want to pick a fight with a Ukrainian or a Russian typically. But like when they're being like, listen, mutants, get away from this, our nuclear power plant fallout area. It's like, all right, fine. And it's so weird, right? At a backdrop of like humanitarian disaster.
Yeah.
It is very, I've made multiple videos just going through like what's considered fun to do in this part of the world, because the YouTube experience coming out of former Soviet socialist republics is just like gallows humor to the max.
Yeah.
And that actually is playing out from the official Defense of Ukraine department, with a blue check next to it on Twitter. So all my research still holds.
Exactly, yeah. And maybe, God forbid, disaster happens to the US. People can start throwing around Fallout references, very popular franchise. Yeah, no, it's a wild situation. And by the way, aside from sorry, what was that?
Well, that's just like what, there's a divide. Like either you go crazy or you start like, or you get depressed and sad, but it's just insane to me to look at this and be like, okay, so in the official correspondence, someone said you're a mutant and you lost this game when it is very much life and death.
They didn't just make the reference, they literally tagged the social media account for the video game, which is odd. And of course, this is a serious situation. Ukraine's ministry added that the Russian troops looted the power plant, taking kettles, lab equipment, and radiation, which I assume, unless there's a mistranslation, is another own, that they're taking the radiation with them. By the way, the IAEA says that there have been reports of radiation sickness as the withdrawal happened. They said some soldiers are being treated in Belarus for radiation sickness, which can cause symptoms like nausea, vomiting, skin damage, seizures, coma. And according to the Ukrainian state nuclear company, the troops, quote, panicked at the first sign of illness, which showed up very quickly, which I think, look, obviously we hate the invasion. I can sort of understand why you'd panic if you started to experience these very stereotypical radiation sickness symptoms after taking over Chernobyl.
Exactly, like it's got to be, from what we read, the feedback from certain Russian soldiers, understandably, at realizing that this is not what they thought they were in for, it's got to be like, this is the worst assignment. They're sitting there comparing, where are you going? I'm going into Ukraine. That's the worst assignment ever. And this one dude looks down and goes like, I'm going to Chernobyl?
Yeah. Well, I mean, that thought that you just expressed might be why apparently a number of troops are refusing to invade Ukraine, according to a lawyer who's representing a group of National Guardsmen who are suing the government. He says nearly 1,000 Russian soldiers have contacted him for legal defense as they try to stop being a part of this. And is that totally independent of yesterday's, or maybe 2 days ago, the big story where Vladimir Putin announced a decree ordering 134,500 new conscripts into the army? It is an annual spring draft. They do these drafts from time to time and says that it has nothing to do with the war in Ukraine, but we know that conscripts have already been sent into Ukraine. So I don't know, I'm not necessarily gonna take Putin's word on it wholly. But anyway, the debacle continues. And again, it's not to say that Russia isn't achieving a number of their objectives, particularly in the eastern portion of Ukraine, or that their objectives might be changing based on the situation on the ground and would continue to if attacks inside of Russia continue. I have a hard time believing that that's going to become the new thing in this war, but I've been proven wrong a number of times before, Brett, so God only knows.
Yeah, and I don't need to tell a TYT audience to be skeptical of official communiques from military agencies. Just factor it all in, and that's why. Because especially in the meantime, everyone's gonna use it to further their own agenda, whether it is significant geopolitically or just in terms of subscriber count. But people are using this. Don't be one of them.
Exactly. That is a direct warning to me, I think. We try to acknowledge our biases and understand them.
Check out the Damage Report podcast each day, wherever you get your podcasts, whether Pocket Casts or Stitcher or iTunes. You can join me as I give you the news and stories you want, with a range of co-hosts and interview guests jumping in on the fun each day. Again, that's the Damage Report, wherever you get your podcasts. And if you get them at iTunes, don't forget to rate and review. Sometimes I'll read them live on the show.